every tutor will tell you that to pass an ACCA exam, you need to practice more questions. That's standard advice. But what we want to do is maximize the benefit we get out of practicing questions. We want quality as well as quantity. My name's Ben Wilson. I'm the ACCA's expert tutor for financial management papers. And in this recording, I'm going to show you how to maximize the quality and the benefit that you can get out of question practice. There's three things we're going to do together. Firstly, we'll discuss the benefits of marking your own answers. Then we're going to look at calculation questions using an actual exam question. It's from September, December 2020, and you can access it on the ACCA's Test Reach platform. And then thirdly, we're going to look at written requirements and how do you self-mark those. So, benefits of self-marking. This is a really important one. I want you to see the marker of your script as being a human being, a person. They've got feelings and needs. And what I want you to do is to think about making their life as easy as possible. We want to make it a simple job to give us as many marks as possible. And the more you can think about that person marking your script, the more you can design your answer so that it picks up marks that are easy for them to give. Next, by reviewing your own answers and doing it in conjunction with looking at the examiner's comments, it helps you to get into the mindset of the examiner. And if you can start to understand the examiner's mindsets, you can start to then design your answer and to see through the question to see what they're really asking and make points that are addressing that specific requirement. And thirdly, and hopefully this is the big one, the more you review your answers, the more you start to change the way you present them, and you start to change them in a way that makes them easier to mark. We're going to think about calculation questions now, and as I said, we're going to be using an actual exam question to look at these. So what I'm doing when I'm reviewing my answers to calculation questions, firstly, I'm thinking and looking at it, standing back. Does my calculation have a logical structure? Does it have flow? Is it easy for someone to follow at a high level? Next, are my workings explained? Now, I know that you can use the spreadsheet functionality so you can come up with some funky formulas, but for me, that's not really enough. What I want to do with my workings is present them in a way that explains them to the marker. It talks them through my logic, so they can really see that I've understood rather than just having memorized how to do the calc. And I want to see, is it possible or easy for the marker to follow the own figure rule? You know that if I make a mistake somewhere early in the calculation, I've made my workings easy enough to follow that they can see how the number flows and they can award follow through marks. We're now going to look at question 2 from the September-December 2020 AFM paper. It's loaded up into the ACCA's Test Reach software, and I'd really encourage you actually to have a go at this question before watching the rest of the recording, because it will help you to get the most out of this. Question 2 from December and September 2020 was a typical NPV question, so 15 marks worth of NPV, followed by some analysis questions, 2 linked analysis questions that are to do with discussing the numbers and a bit of wider analysis. And there's quite a long and complicated scenario to support this question. I'd really recommend you have a go at this question yourself before watching the rest of the recording, because you'll get much more out of it that way. But let's go into the Test Reach software and have a look at marking an answer to this question. Here we are in Test Reach, the practice platform. And I've got the marking scheme up here on the left, showing the number of marks available for each part. Then in the middle, I've got my answer here. I've got both my spreadsheet and I've got my word processor as well. And then on the right-hand side of the screen here, I've got the marking section, and I can change the view so that I can have either the marking guidance showing on the screen, or I can have the model answer for confirming or checking that my numbers are right. So thinking back to those 3 principles of calculation questions, do you remember the first of them? Yeah, it was about your workings having a logical structure. So does my answer have a logical structure here? Well, I'm pretty proud of it, actually. I've separated out the non-taxable cash flows and the taxable cash flows, making it a bit clearer and easier for the market to see what I've done. And, I'm pretty proud of this as well. It's really clear what currency everything's in. Lira, lira, lira. And then down here, after we do the exchange, we convert into euros, really clear from that point that everything's in euros. So that's a really good feature of this answer. So when I'm reviewing it, I'm giving myself a pat on the back there and thinking, yeah, I'll carry on doing that. But what about when it comes to looking at the workings? Are the workings clear and easy to follow? Have I explained myself in the workings? And therefore, having explained myself, can I award own figure rule marks? We'll pick out a couple of different parts of this answer to illustrate. So here, the first bit we're going to look at is the working capital line. Now, the working capital line, actually, if you look at the numbers in the answer, and in my answer, I've actually got this correct. How many marks were available for that? Working capital is 2 marks. So I can award myself all 2 of those marks, or all 2 of them, or otherwise known as both. But let's have a look at, let's assume that, let's say I had made a little silly mistake. Would it have been easy to follow my workings and my answer? Well, let's go to the workings on working capital. And here is my working capital working. I've included on screen the bit of narrative information about how working capital is supposed to be calculated. This is from the scenario, just so you can see it all in one place. So we're supposed to have initial working capital of 25 million, and it grows at the rate of inflation in Canvia, which is 10%. And then it's released at the end of the project. Now, is my working easy to follow? Had I made a mistake? So the initial 25 million that we're told to put in, that's clear. And look in the formula bar, you can see it's grown by 10%. It's taken the previous year and growing by 10%. And the same year, same there, taking the previous year and growing by 10%. So one simple formula, easy to follow. What about this cash flow? Look, I'm saying take the previous year's working capital, here that's 25, and adjust it up to the next year's working capital requirement of 27.5, a difference of 2.5, a cash outflow. Good, easy to follow, again, because it's set out in steps. And this is the bit that's really impressive actually about the answer. I've explained that the working capital needs to be in place in advance. So the cash flow required to support T1's working capital goes out at T0. Another gold star. This is a great working. Back into the answer now for something a bit less impressive. Land and buildings, that disposal value. What happened there? I got 101.4, but I was supposed to get 214.2. Are there any partial marks available? Well, we can see that there's 1 mark available for the land and buildings residual value. So potentially I could get half a mark if I got it partially right. Let's have a look at the working then and see if we can get partial marks. And here is that working showing on screen. I've done 75 times 1.3 times 1.04. But what was I supposed to do? Let's have a look at the scenario. Okay. It was supposed to grow at a rate of 30% throughout the 4-year life of the investment. So that would be times 1.3 to the power 4. And I've done it. I've done the calculation wrong. I've times 1.3, but I've times 1.04. But I've ended up with a random number that really isn't correct. I haven't done this right. But I've put 2 calculations here into the same formula, which runs the risk that the marker misses what I've done. This is what I'm supposed to have done. And look how nicely presented the working is. I'm showing that I take the purchase price of 75 in line with the scenario. I add 30% a year, nicely labeled. Look at it. So that's times 1.3. And then to the power 4, to show that it is cumulative inflation, to get to my, again, nicely labelled inflated disposal value. That's the thing of beauty. So even if I'd done this wrong and that step there I'd got incorrect somehow, I've made it so easy to follow. I could have got half a mark. But the way that my working is presented here, really poorly, I'm going to have to give myself 0. Ouch. Let's consider written requirements now and reviewing our scripts to a wordy part of a question. First thing I'm looking for is, have I answered all parts of the question fully? Or have I shown evidence of time pressure? Or have I overdone it? I want to write an appropriate amount. And I need to look at the number of marks available to be able to do that. Next, has my answer got sufficient depth given the verb in the question? Now at this level, AFM is likely to be an evaluate or discuss, a higher level verb, which means I'm going to need quite a decent amount, at least 2 sentences for each point that I'm making to fully evaluate, fully discuss. And finally, does my answer the specific question that has been set? Or have I gone off on one a little bit? Is it a bit abstract and random? If my answer is something that is completely different to what's in the marking scheme and in the model answer, chances are I've gone off on a bit of a tangent and it's not worth any marks. We're going to look at those written parts from question 2 of the September-December 2020 AFM paper to illustrate how to mark here. Again, have a go at this question first if you can, because it will help you to understand my answer in more detail and you'll get more out of this session. We'll use part B here to illustrate how to mark a written question and also to discuss some of the challenges around marking your own answer. So part B was to explain possible strategies they could adopt to avoid a block on dividend remittances if Canvia's opposition party was to win the election. It's 4 marks. And when you look at the marking scheme says up to 2 marks per point that you make. But for it to be 2 marks, we'll look at that verb. It needs to be well explained. Now I've got 4 separate points here, and we're going to go through each of them separately and work out whether they're worth marks. What I'd like you to do first, though, is pause the recording and go through each of these 4 points, and you mark it. You decide how many marks you think it's worth. Right. The first point, manufacture fully in the Eurozone, not in Canvia. Now, actually, that's quite a decent point. There is a mark to be had out of that if it had been fully explained, and we talked about why that would help to avoid dividend remittances, and that would be something about not having to transfer funds out of Canvia because we could keep that money there. But it's not been explained, has it? Manufacture fully in the Eurozone, not in Canvia, is not enough. There's nowhere near enough there to score a mark. So I'm going to give that a big fat 0. What about the second point? Lobbying this new party, emphasising local jobs being created, encouraging a pro-business approach. By establishing a working relationship, Colvin could influence government policy and reduce the risk of them implementing dividend controls. What do you think of that? Did you like it as a point? I think it's fairly decent, actually. And it has been explained. There's enough detail in there for you to see how it works and why it would reduce the block on dividend remittances. It's not in the marking scheme. When you look at the model answer, here is that model answer. Pause it if you want to read through it in detail. But it's not in the model answer, but that doesn't mean it's not a decent point. Would it work? Yes, I think it would. And it has been well explained, so I'm going to give that the 2 marks. What about the third point? Work with a local partner. They may face less government interference. What did you think of that one? I do think it's a decent strategy for the company to follow, but that's not going to stop us being able to, that's not going to stop the government from blocking any remittances. I'm still going to have to send some money back to my home country. So I don't think this one would work. So I'm going to give that 0. Also, it hasn't been developed enough. What about this final point? Transfer cash without it being a dividend from the subsidiary company to the parent. This could take the form of a royalty or a head office recharge that would mean it would bypass the government's restrictions on dividends. Many large companies do this by having ownership of their brand in a subsidiary in one country, then charging overseas subsidiaries for using the brand. This effectively gets cash out of the overseas country and back to the country of brand ownership. What did you think of that as a point? It's a bit long-winded, isn't it? It took a long time to explain. There is something in there, though. I think it would be an effective way of getting money out of the country. But I've gone on too long, and I haven't brought it back to being about a dividend. I've just said it's a way of getting money out of the country. So because it's long-winded, waffly, and it kind of gets to the point, but not quite, I'm only going to give this one 1 mark. So for me, part B here, I'm going to give it 3 marks out of the 4. How did that compare to yours? Standing back a little bit with this answer then, did I answer it fully enough for the number of marks available? There were 4 marks available and I made 4 points. And although the marking scheme is saying 2 marks per point, I wouldn't really have known that in advance. I always think, and I advise students in AFM, assume 1 mark per point. So for a 4-mark answer, 4 points is the right approach. Was there enough depth to my answer considering the verb? There was in 2 of the points, point 2 and point 4, but not in point 1 and point 3. And did I answer the specific question? I think I did actually. All of these points were focused on dividend remittances, with the possible exception of point 3. But overall, this was a pretty decent answer to quite a tough question. That's it for this recording. I hope you found it useful and it's given you some decent tips that will help you when reviewing your own answers to AFM questions.